Thor Comic Series Part 2. So let's get started. When Thor discovered that his more zealous Viking worshippers had slaughtered the inhabitants of a Christian monastery, he was shocked and ashamed that they committed atrocities in his name. Thor then withdrew from earthly activities altogether, and the active worship of the gods of Asgard effectively ended. For centuries, the only memory that man would have of the Asgardians would be through myths and legends. Alternately, another story tells of how, 1,000 years ago, the Sky Fathers of Earth's pantheons retreated from mortal worship at the command of the third host of the Celestials. During the 11th century AD, Thor faced off with the celestial-powered being called Apocalypse. Seeking revenge, Thor blessed Jarnporn with his own blood to imbue it with the power to pierce celestial armor. At one point, Adolf Hitler succeeded in contacting Thor and deceived him into aiding the cause of the Germans, the descendants of the people who had once worshipped him, in the current war. Thor, therefore, clashed with the invaders and nearly killed the Second Union Jack with a blast of lightning from his enchanted hammer. Learning that Hitler was evil, Thor vowed to aid him no more and withdrew most of the electricity in Union Jack's body back into his hammer, somehow restoring him to health in the process. The Second Union Jack now possessed the superhuman power to discharge electrical bolts from his body. Following the war, Thor was not very active on Earth. He had been summoned to assist the Olympians on a handful of occasions, such as when he helped defend Olympus from an invasion by creatures spawned from the mind of Professor Buffanoff in 1951. Thor came to the assistance of the Olympians on 3 more occasions. The first came when Venus was trapped in the nation of Casarobia, a prisoner of its ruling sultan. Thanks to his half-brother Loki, a spell had been cast that prevented any gods from using their powers in the region. Loki was convinced to lift the spell, and both he and Thor worked together to hold off the Sultan's forces long enough for Venus to overthrow him later. Both Thor and the Olympian war god Mars, Ares, helped Venus defend New York City from mad inventor John Dark and his mechanized army. When Dark refused to surrender, Thor decimated his lab with a bolt of lightning, seemingly slaying Dark. Thor once more came to the aid of Venus, lending his lightning powers to stop the massive creeping death. Thor led an active, adventurous life in Asgard, doing battle with frost giants and other enemies of the Golden Realm. Odin watched Thor become more and more arrogant and banished him to Midgard several times to learn humility. Over the years, Odin grew increasingly dissatisfied with Thor's headstrong behavior and excessive pride. On one occasion Thor violated a truce between the Asgardians and the frost giants, thereby nearly starting another war. Finally, while Thor was engaged in a brawl in an Asgardian tavern, Odin summoned him to his presence. Odin decided that it was time Thor learned humility. Odin had Thor surrender his hammer to him and then sent him to Earth in the mortal guise of a crippled young medical student named Donald Blake, stripped of his memory, again, of his true identity. As Blake, Thor learned the value of humble perseverance in dealing with his injured leg, and he came to care for the sick and dying, first as a medical student, and later as a successful physician. After leaving medical school, Blake opened a private practice in New York, and quickly gained renown as a great surgeon. After Thor had spent 10 years in the role of Blake, Odin planted within Blake's mind the suggestion to take a vacation in Norway. There Blake encountered a party of alien Kronans, also known as the Stone Men from Saturn. Blake fled from the Kronans into a cavern, the very same one that had served as Thor's birthplace millennia ago, where Odin had left Thor's hammer in the enchanted form of a wooden cane. Trapped in the cavern by a great boulder, Blake struck the boulder with the cane in frustrated anger and was transformed back into his true godly form of Thor. As Thor, he escaped the cavern and drove off the Kronans. At first Thor still had no memory of his past life as an Asgardian god, although as months passed, more of his memories returned. Finally, a few years later, Odin revealed to him the false nature of the Blake identity and the reason for it. Thor maintained his Blake identity on Earth and continued his medical practice. Part of his affinity for Earth was his subconscious realization that his maternal heritage was of this world. The other part was simply his love for humanity and his need to experience those things that only mortals could know. Thor came to divide his time between Earth and Asgard, and does so to this day. For years, Thor was in love with a mortal named Jane Foster who worked as a nurse for Blake. Odin disapproved of his romance and refused several requests by Thor to make her immortal, going so far as to allow Loki to set the enchantress on Thor to drive a wedge between the couple. Odin even traveled to Earth to end their relationship. When Thor decided to reveal his secret identity as Donald Blake to her, Odin temporarily removed his powers. Eventually the romance between Thor and Foster came to an end on its own, and Thor renewed his relationship with Sif, though that relationship has suffered strains in recent years.